What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be ranking the top 10 genetic features that really go a long way and in some cases are pretty much necessary to build an aesthetic physique. Now, before we get into this ranking, I just wanted to reiterate that if you don't have all of these or most of these, don't stress, don't worry. You could still build a fantastic physique with only a couple of these or even none of these, as long as you put in the hard work. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, you're never gonna get a top 1% or even top 10% physique if you don't have most of these features, but you know, there's other more important things in life. So the number one genetic feature for building an aesthetic physique is gonna be height. You're gonna need to be pretty tall. The truth is that we're not talking about bodybuilding here, so being short in bodybuilding has really big advantages. It helps you look a lot bigger, especially in photos. But in the real world, when it comes to aesthetics and the type of aesthetic that we try to preach on this channel, being tall is a huge advantage. In the ideal height being 6 foot to, let's say, 6'3", 6'4", that range is ideal for aesthetics. Get taller than that, you tend to start looking a bit lanky. It's hard to really put on enough size to compensate for that. And shorter, I mean, obviously, if you're 5'11", 5'10", it's amazing as well. But the shorter you get, the more it kind of negates the benefits of having an aesthetic physique, unfortunately. Number two, second most important genetic trait for having an aesthetic physique is going to be having wide clavicles. So much like your height, wide clavicles is kind of a make or break feature, unless you have really just a very narrow waist to compensate for narrow clavicles. What can I say? When it comes to aesthetics, a lot of it comes down to that V-taper, building that X-frame. It requires broad shoulders and a small waist in order to develop it. So you're going to be at a huge disadvantage if you have very narrow shoulders. I mean, it just is what it is, unfortunately. Number three is going to be having a narrow waist. Some guys have long torsos, narrower waists naturally. And like we just said, with the wide clavicles, the broad shoulders, it helps to create that V-taper, essentially. Now, if you have a thicker waist, you're going to have to be extra lean to compensate. And some guys can get shredded and still not have really good proportions with their V-taper because their waist is just, and hips are just naturally too broad. So that's the third one. Number four is your genetic set point for body fat percentage. Some guys are just genetically destined to be at higher body fat percentages, and cutting down to even 15% body fat is a real struggle and makes them suffer a lot. Being lean is important for an aesthetic physique. Of course, you can have a bulkier, very aesthetic physique as well. The only thing is, if we're going specifically for the type of look that we're preaching on this channel, which is typically in that 10 to 12% body fat range, having a higher genetic set point is going to make things very difficult. Doable, but difficult. It is possible to lower your set point to a degree, but it's just going to be all the harder to diet down. All right. So number five, I believe we're at. 5 is going to be your ab insertions. Some guys have, even at a very low body fat percentage, look at their abdominals and they have a 4-pack, or their abdominals are not symmetrical and it just looks off. So having good abdominal insertions where you have the full 6-pack or 8-pack and they're all well symmetrical is going to go a long way to building and having an aesthetic physique. Of course, you need to be lean enough for that, for those abdominals to show, right? That's why body fat percentage is going to trump your abdominal insertions, but they're both important. Number 6 is going to be your muscle bellies, all right? So having good full muscle bellies, especially in your arms, is going to make a big difference. Some guys have really bad muscle bellies that are short, and they can have very well developed arms, but they're just not going to look nearly as aesthetic as having really wide, really long muscle bellies and that full look. I wouldn't say that's necessarily a complete deal breaker, because as long as you have all the others, you have the broad shoulders, the narrow waist, you're lean, good insertions for the abs, you don't necessarily have to have the biggest looking arms or shoulders to really compensate for that, or chest. So it's still important. It's definitely something that makes the physique look complete and aesthetic. But if you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. All right, so these next ones are not nearly as important as the first few we mentioned, but still makes a big difference on your physique. So number 7 is your vascularity genetics. So some guys are extremely vascular, veiny everywhere, even at higher body fat percentages. And that just makes your physique look more popping. It kind of gives you the illusion of being leaner. And some girls find it freaky if there's a lot of veins. But in my experience, most seem to like a man who has a little bit of vascularity in his hands, forearms, shoulders. And if you're really lean and lucky with your vascularity, even the abdominal veins that crawl up, that usually appears if you're very, very lean, like 8-9% body fat or under. And it's a nice little kind of icing on top for your physique. Number 8 is going to be your legs. Specifically, it depends on which type of frame you're trying to build. If you're really going more for that X-frame physique, then your quads and having nice popping quads are going to be pretty important. If you're like most guys, I think, and you're just good with having a nice V-taper, you don't really care so much about having really developed legs, then I would say your calves are probably the most important leg feature. Now, legs kind of get ignored, and a lot of guys, make the mistake of not training legs, skipping leg day. And that is a mistake, in my opinion. I mean, it could look really weird if your upper body is extremely developed and your legs are twigs. So don't skip leg day, but emphasize the portion of the legs that you really want to develop. So if you're trying to go for that X-frame physique, your quads need to be very well developed to have that popping out effect that is going to make them look really nice. And if you're going for that V-taper physique, then having really developed calves should be your emphasis. Now, like I said, calves are big time genetics. I think there's a number that sometimes gets thrown around. 80% of your calves are genetics, 20% is how you train them. I don't know how accurate that is, but there's no doubt that having genetically gifted calves really makes a big difference when it comes to the lower portion of your body, your lower half. But seeing as the upper body really is what completes this physique and makes it what it is, it's not the end of the world if you have small calves or relatively small legs, at least in my opinion. Now, number 9 is going to be having thick wrists and well-developed forearms. This is something that guys often don't train at all. They don't typically train their forearms. Now, if you're someone who has really small wrists and forearms because you're very smaller bones, more ectomorphic, kind of lanky physique, it's going to be pretty hard to develop them. So the reason it's lower on the list is because A, it's not that important, and B, you can develop them to a degree, even if you are genetically not the strongest when it comes to forearms and wrists. But it's definitely something worth training and keeping in mind. It does look good. Most of the time, you're not walking around with a tank top or shirtless. You're usually walking around with a shirt. And so if you can have your sleeves rolled up and your forearms showing, it usually helps to have some nice developed forearms for your aesthetics. And number 10 is going to be your neck. Now, neck, like forearms, is something that you can train, you can make it get bigger, but it's not something that most guys train, and it's not something that's necessarily the funnest to train. So if you're just a guy who genetically has a thick neck, you're all the better off for it. And trust me when I say neck is actually quite important when it comes to aesthetics. I'm sure you guys have seen those pictures of celebrities or actors or whoever with pencil necks versus a thicker, more masculine neck. and it makes a big difference with your facial harmony. So I would very much recommend, if you're someone who's not very genetically blessed with your neck, to train it. Start very light, do more of a higher rep sets, because it's something that you definitely do not want to injure. So be careful with it. And yeah, those are my 10 genetic features that I think are highly important for building an aesthetic physique. Let me know in the comments below if you agree with these 10 features. And if you disagree, I would love to hear your recommendations or what you would put. And subscribe, like the video, share, and catch you guys in the next one. Take care.